Thank you for the chance to sit with all of you today. You may wish to sit comfortably. Seeing some of these faces that I haven't seen for years, and some for a few days, some as long, um, uh, is one of the great treasures of Sangha to have a chance to know each other over periods of time, sometimes a long time or a short time, decades if we're lucky, and to see ourselves and to meet each other in practice, to meet each other in times of good times, bad times, in birth and death, in times where we're struggling, in times where it's a great and joyful meeting here now. And there's this sense of riding this long wave of Sangha, if you will, of being in community with each other, of seeing that there's always, throughout all the ups and downs and forwards and backwards of our lives, there's this potential there for meeting. There's this potential there for awakening, whether we know it or not. And there's a case in the transmission of the lamp, case 20 of the transmission of the lamp, which just takes one moment of such meeting that I thought would be a good place to start with today. It reads that in ancient days, the Buddha preached that there would appear here a great person, this person who would make the subtle culture prosper. I like that phrase, the subtle culture prosper. That there's some thing subtle such that cannot be named necessarily, cannot be transacted with, cannot be rationalized. And it's a culture, it's something that we share together. That this person would make the subtle culture prosper. And now, reads this koan, and now you meet me. This is the prediction. You meet me. He's not saying this from an ego point of view. You have met the great light, but you meet me, and in doing so, we meet each other. There's this meeting. And hearing this, the ancestor in this case, whose wonderful name is, and I'm going to have to take my time in pronouncing it, Kumaralubda. Kumaralubda. In hearing this, Kumaralubda woke up. And in the text eloquently then says, he was awakened to the wisdom of the cycle of life. He was awakened to the wisdom of the cycle of life. Usually they just say he had a great awakening, but he was awakened to the wisdom of the cycle of life. So I'd like to explore this meeting at this point and know the awakening that we can all have the wisdom for in the cycle of life, and the potential that is always there in Sangha, in community, in Sangha in the greatest sense of the world, to meet and to awaken to the wisdom of the cycle of life. One of the things that drew me to this koan was this, what has always been here, quality that is realized in this koan. The subtle culture, as I said before, that doesn't bear a name, that can't be engineered or rationalized, but which is acculturated, which is shared in being alive, in being constant in our actual body, which does not end with our skin. It is here in this world, in this place, always, and is not added, but it can be brought to prosper. It can be awakened to. Someone asked me once, how is it that a person can know if they are enlightened or not? And the fact is, we are always already enlightened. It's just a matter of realizing this. And so he was awakened to this wisdom that is in the wisdom of life, the wisdom that is there in the cycles of life. And that is something that we realize too. In working with this koan recently with a friend of mine, a student, this person taking up this koan remembered a time she was leaving the hospital after her brother had died in the hospital that day, and just how leaving the hospital with that sense of grief and that sense of wishing that it were otherwise. And yet, when as leaving, also she just was able to stay with this moment of grief and feel as she left the hospital the rain falling down upon her. The coming out of that hospital, there was nothing that she would have otherwise in terms of honoring her brother. She wanted to feel this grief as it was. She was awakened to that thing which is present there, even in this moment of grief, even in this moment of happiness. So how do we work with this? How do we find this as a matter of our practice? Find something that how do we awaken to this wisdom in the cycle of life? One of the great practices that you will have all spent some time with is this koan mu, which of course means no or does not have. And this sense of arriving at of holding this koan, you can hold mu in many ways. And one of the, of course, ways is to use it as a point where you keep on coming back to it with every breath and just practicing that koan of mu, which can be a point of concentration. There's can be a way of just allowing mu to settle in through your bones. One of the interesting practices with the koan mu is to also hold it in its meaning of does not have. You know, the koan reads that monk asked Chow Cho, does a dog have Buddha nature or no? And Chow Cho responds, no, does not have. So what would happen if you just sat with this no for anything that happens in your life? Would you do not hold any position of wanting for or against anything in your life? What happens if we say no to any position or opinion or idea you have about how this situation should be, as opposed to just sitting with the unadulterated, the untrifled with reality of this moment? Just even in this practice period today, to any time that you feel this thought arrive, I'm sitting well or I'm not sitting well, the bells are being rung well, the chanting seems too slow or too fast, and just no, no. Do not have any, do not allow yourself to rest in your opinion, but just to stay with every single moment that you encounter. There's this sense, Yun Men once said, it is better to have nothing than to have something good. Some sense of I like this or I'm against this. Every thought of good or bad, just to sit with no, does not have. What arises in that moment of removing any sense of it being other than it is? And how does this relate to the wisdom of the cycles of living? We heard this in the story of Huinang, who, the sixth ancestor, who upon receiving the robe and the bowl from his teacher and was wandering away, was chased by a former general, one of the other monks, who wanted to retrieve this robe and bowl because he felt like Huinang didn't deserve it. And Huinang, having no particular position that he needed to hold in this, just tried to hand it back. And realizing this, the general was shaken and could not move. And he said, please, teach me what you have that allows you to be this way. And Huinang said simply, thinking neither good nor bad, bring forth this mind. Thinking neither good nor bad, neither good nor evil about this moment. What is there when we remove even good or bad, for or against. What happens right this moment, sitting with this? We'll have a chance to talk about this later. But how does it change the perspective? To sit, to stand, to walk, without having any position to attend to, any position to hold. What changes in the way we hold ourselves in the world in this way? We were talking about this in Melbourne yesterday, and the idea of the realization of perfection. We were going on a long journey we've been going on around the ox herding pictures, where we are taking each one of the ox herding pictures up each week and studying it together, seeing what arises in us, how they're in this beautiful example of the cycles of life in these ox herding pictures. We can see in each one of them there is a moment of perfection that does not need to be held on to. We don't hold on to ox herding picture number 1 or 2 or 3, but we allow each of them to arise as they are, and to see the perfection that arises in allowing for this flow of the journey to take place in our lives. In the 8th and 9th ox herding pictures, the titles of them, the title of the 8th is The Person and the Ox Are Both Forgotten. The 9th is The Return to Origin, Back at the Source, Nirvana, Completion. And I remember the first time I read these pictures and verses, I was amazed to get to these pictures, think this must be the final picture, to how could there be more than this sense of letting go of all things and just resting in the picture that they have is of an enso of nirvana. In fact, the 9th verse reads, originally pure and clean, without a speck of dust, seen through the growth and decay of all forms, at ease in the unconditioned, without illusory phantoms. What is there to embellish? Waters blue, mountains green, sit and see through the change of things. Sounds just heavenly, doesn't it? But then the verse scurries around and ties your shoelaces together, as it were. It says, return to the origin, back to the source. What a wasted effort! Far better just to be blind and deaf. Inside the hut, no sight of these things outside. Streams flow of their own accord. Roses naturally bloom red. What do you think you've attained there, Buster? Streams flow of their own accord. Roses bloom naturally red. We do not need to do that. There is something about having attained. Even what would it be like to, even at that point of having attained this great moment of realization, to say no, does not have even at that point. Yunmen puts it more directly. You have your own bright light, but when you look, you cannot see it. If you want to see it, you can't. The darkness is dark, dark. Now, what is your bright light? No one answered, Yunmen, so he answered for them. The kitchen, the entrance gate. Then he adds, it would be better to have nothing than to have something good. Just take a moment to pause with this koan for a moment. You have your own bright light. The wisdom of the cycle of life is right there for you all along. You have your own bright light. When you look at it, you can't see it. And let's return to this, but this idea of wanting to accumulate, to hold on to direct yourself towards it. If you want to see it, you can't. The darkness is dark, dark. This image of the darkness, of course, is so much a part of the Zen experience and the Taoist experience of what it is to live with the mystery, to live with those things that we cannot accumulate, or is just the impact of not knowing when we let go of all sense of having to shine a bright light on things. We find that it will never shine everywhere, that there's a mystery at the heart of our experience. In fact, in the image, the Taoist image of a temple, there's a deep, untraceable, unpierceable well at the center of the temple, out of which streams all the light and all the things. There's a sense of the perfection and lightning coming back together over and over again in this image. And then once we are able to let go of all sense of having to know, once we are able to realize the darkness in the center of our experience, then we meet. Then we meet. The dark, as Jung Men says, then the temple and the kitchen gate appear. Here's another instance of this with Yun Men again. A student came to him and said, "I am reaching for the light," said the student to Yun Men. "Please help me." "Forget the light," said Yun Men. "Bring me your reaching. Bring me your reaching." Notice just the sense of your life as it is, even in the sense of wanting to reach out towards wisdom. In this moment of inquiry itself is the wisdom. Instead of reaching for something out there, find the wisdom that is already always the wisdom of the cycle of life that is right here. Open to your life as it is. And as we do with Zazen, instead of reaching for freedom from your reaching, find freedom in the midst of your reaching already. What would it do? What would it be your experience if you were always already free to awaken to the wisdom of the cycle of your life here and to put your vow of awakening to the wisdom of life as it is right here? What do you find? What is here already, and how does this shape our experience of what it is to be human? It may be something in your experience already that when you find yourself with no position, when you find yourself metaphorically naked on the ground of your being, how much more direct and personal or intimate each moment becomes, directly, that your life is directly connected with the sound of that distant dog barking, or when the siren arises on the street. You find that your life is intricately both caught up and emerging with all life around you, that you find yourself intimate without cover and without defense. A life lived with this sense of being available, fetchable to this moment. What is this? What is it to make a vow to live your life in this sense of being available for each moment, just as it is? We all choose what we put at the center of our life, consciously or unconsciously. And unconsciously, I think we can find that our opinions, wishes, biases, these are often right here at the center. But the Zen practice is to learn this as a letting go, to see that Zen practice is letting go of any position at all that we might hold, including notions of what the Dharma is. Does a dog have Buddha nature? No. and committing to meeting your life as it is, as a vow, and committing to waking up in your life in this way. To live by a vow of no fixed personal address, but the way of living in the biggest field of activity to save all beings. The opinions and ideas who I am, become less and less about my identity and living in a great field of activity, wide, rich. You have had some experience of this yourself, in many ways, I'm sure. To live in a way in which you are not explaining your life to yourself. You're not trying to have uh, uh, a narrative to your life about what is happening, but you allow your life to speak, just to speak directly to what it is. In the Vimalakirti Sutra, there it's I guess the one thing that I would add to this is that this sense of letting go is not only about finding equality, finding a sense of pathlessness, of finding a place where all things are at peace. In the Vimalakirti Sutra, there's uh, one of the stories that comes up in the Vimalakirti Sutra is when the bodhisattvas take a trip to a place called the world of fragrances. The world of fragrances is a place where there's all fragrance, no forms whatsoever. There's no fixed anything. The only thing just are just wafting perfumes of this and that, and slight smells and so forth. And it's all fragrance, no forms, and there are also no problems there. The beings there, they look at a world of life and death and struggles and bumping up against hard things. And they look at our world and they say, how can you live in this world? They call it they call our world the topsy-turvy world. How can you live this way? They ask the bodhisattvas. But then as we learn in talking further with them, nothing happens in the world of fragrances. No one dies, but no one is born. No one can teach the Dharma. No one can heal the sick. No one can fall in love. No one can create art. The world is already always complete and not moving in that place, and so there is no thing that emerges. And so, in this way, the Bodhisattvas learned something about our topsy-turvy world and what it is to be alive as a human being on this earth. The Bodhisattva way of life does not just go beyond and rest in purity. In Melbourne, stepping through the Oxfording pictures, we're nearing the end, and we are at the 9th Oxfording pictures with a focus on the end, so nothing anywhere before the meeting, as I said. It's an interesting thing, this in the Mahayana we have this image of the lotus in the fire as opposed to the lotus in the mud. Uh, the fire does not harm the lotus, and the lotus does not extinguish the fire. The lotus in the fire, of course, is an image of in the midst of activity, in the midst of rising and falling, in the midst of having career paths, of having disappointments, of having injustices in this world, of having war and having degradation, and having moments of great passion and wonder. In the midst of this fire, that is where the lotus appears. The fire does not harm the lotus, and the lotus does not extinguish the fire. They coexist in the midst of things is also this moment of awakening. Both are transformed. For a lotus to be born, for a person to have disattached themselves from the sense of identifying and clinging to sorrow and the past, but to be able to become awake, this is a rare and beautiful thing. And we are not denigrating the view of the lotus that arises out of the mud that first came up, the Theravadan view of the lotus in the mud. That's a wonderful thing. But also, For a lotus to grow and practice in the midst of fires of life is also rare and beautiful. And so we reconcile these two. We're always balancing, finding synergy with our desires, a wish for justice, a wish for our leaders to be wise and awake, and to protect this earth, and a rising out of connection with all things around us. We can hold being in love with people. We can allow ourselves to engage with awareness that we may get hurt. We can allow ourselves to be stretched and disrupted by the fires of living. We can hold this urgency as a powerful tool and grow and act and emerge. But we can also learn to be free in the midst of this, to be wholehearted and yet not find any fixed address in any of this. What is this like, moment by moment? If we were to do this for the rest of this practice period today, for the rest of this day, for the rest of our life, to have as a celebration of being alive, breaking the spell of both prejudice and purity. The 10th ox herding picture in the ox herding sequence, I'll just read a part of the verse here. Here we enter the market, leaning on your staff, you return home, hanging around honky-tonks and fish stalls, all become Buddhas. Entering the market with bare chest and bare feet, smeared with mud and ash, broad face beaming, no display of magic powers, yet withered trees burst into bloom. It's a wonderful image. All become Buddhas. All have been Buddhas throughout this cycle of life. Throughout all the ox herding pictures, we've all been Buddhas. We only just realize it, just that wisdom in the meeting. And in that meeting, dead trees burst into life. Yunyan, that aspect of how does the work get done is an interesting thing that we might take up afterwards. But I'll just end this part of it by talking, only by walking freely, without attachment, can we give ourselves fully to love, to beauty, to justice, to this whole earth. Only when we have woken past that sense that we are a subject of our opinions or ideas about how things should be, and can actually be bare-chested and free, smeared by ash and dust in the world. Only when our lives selves to be broken open, our hearts full, our hearts subject to being broken and full of sadness and grief as well as joy. Only then can we flow freely as a bodhisattva. And only then, I would suggest, are we fully human and alive. Let's just pause here. I think we're going to take Kinhin. But when we come back, I'd love to talk with you further and maybe take up some of these as koans together and koan sharing after this.